Welcome to another edition of the Watchful Citizen, a local access program brought to you by the Lancaster County Democratic Party. I'm your host, Jane Egan. My guest today is climate change activist John Atkeison. Welcome to the program, John.
Thanks, Jane.
Let's begin by sharing with our viewers a little bit about your background and how you became involved in climate change issues.
Well, I was just a work every day kind of guy like everybody else, and I heard about this strange sounding issue and global warming, and I knew nothing about it, so I got a book and read it. And it was a very well done book, but I'm thinking to myself, this can't possibly be true. So I went and actually reread the book, did my own research, and discovered that it was happening. I looked at the internet, and which you can still do today, and look at the pictures taken or the drawings and paintings done of glaciers in Europe many years ago, and looked at comparable pictures, photographs today, and you could actually see the glaciers receding as they melted from their face. So that kind of thing, pictorial evidence, made a big impact, and it just added up. And when I really got to thinking about it, that I figured this does change everything, because if what we're doing with global warming, burning fossil fuels, putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that hold heat in, if that's turning out to act like the science says it is, then we're all in trouble. So that's how I became fascinated with it, and I've spent most of my time in the last dozen or more years on this issue.
So you're an activist, but you're not doing this alone. Do you have an organization that you that you're working with, or
Indeed.
that you have organized? Tell us about that.
There are a couple. One is EnergyLink, which is an organization I put together to do primarily education of ordinary people about climate change. I felt that the people left out of the conversation are the people like I was, the ordinary working people who have very little idea about what's coming down the pipeline. Now, it's not as bad as when I started a dozen and more years ago, because nowadays people generally have an idea that something's going on, and they see the storms getting stronger and the rainfall patterns are different, and they know it's getting warmer by instrumental record, not by what you remember, but they watch the news somewhat. And so it's not as bad, but I think it's still important that people understand as much as they can so they know a real solution from a fake solution, because we need to have a solution. So EnergyLink does that. And that's sort of the fun part. We do house parties and so forth.
So this is a nonprofit organization.
It is,
okay,
and fairly new. The other organization is in the Democratic Party. We have a climate caucus, and we have a small group of activists that's just starting from scratch, and we aim to influence the political side of things, which is where it's really going to happen.
And that is a good lead into my next question, which is, we do have a important election coming up. How do you message the climate change issues to candidates and politicians, the ones that we're hoping will help us make a difference in changing things? Can you speak to that?
Sure. It's a tough balancing act sometimes, because on the one hand, if we don't address this issue, we are in really big trouble. And it's not like we have forever to fix it whenever we get around to it. There's a deadline, and we can talk about that. On the other hand, the powers in the fossil fuel industries, which are the root cause of the problem, because remember, if we burn fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas, it produces the greenhouse gases. And that's what traps the heat in the energy system of the planet, causes it to heat up, gets out of whack, and so that's the root of the problem. So they've got a lot of money. They've put their products, like gasoline, heating oil, and so forth, they put their products at the center of the economy and the center of the whole society. And they get extremely rich from doing that. So they can fund candidates and talking heads on TV to say, oh, it's not true, don't worry about it, they're just making it up, it's a bunch of alarmists. And actually, I like to say, if you're not alarmed, you're not paying attention, or you just want to distract. So it's anybody who raises climate issues is probably going to face more opposition and more well-funded opposition than if they just sat down and were quiet. So we really want to support those people working in politics that are willing to step up and take a stand. And that's one of the reasons we're organizing the caucus. We found that with Bernie Sanders coming into the Democratic process this year, he raised that issue quite forcefully. About a third of his speech here in Lincoln, Nebraska concerned climate change and was received well. And in the platform committee debates about how to shape the platform, there was tremendous attention paid to it, and it's a pretty darn good, the very best platform for climate change that's ever been in American politics. So that's an important thing. So it gives us a place to stand, not only with particular candidates, but on a more broad basis, that we have a platform at the Lancaster County level and at the national level, and I've got the national language right here. We've got platforms that say this is a critical issue and we need to take a stand and really start acting on it. So all those things have built up to give us a dynamic where we can advocate for candidates that speak out, and we can advocate for the underlying, what the party stands for. And that, I think, will bring people out in November.
So this is an issue that has been talked about along with a lot of other issues, more along the lines of immigration issues, jobs creation, that sort of thing. How are you messaging getting the climate change issues out to the forefront to the voters and making that as big an issue as some of these others that the presidential candidates in particular are talking about, but also our state and local candidates?
Well, there's again, two sides to it. One is, if we don't fix this, jobs is going to be one of our least worries, which is hard to imagine. But it really is an existential threat to our whole society. And it's happening a lot faster than scientists 20 years ago thought it was going to, and now they're referring to that. They're saying this is happening faster and it's accelerating. So on the one hand, it's something we have to address no matter what. Luckily, right now, the existing energy structure, electricity making apparatus, which is one of the two biggest sources of greenhouse gases, they've automated and cut jobs pretty much to the maximum there. They call it efficiency, we call it job cuts. And they substitute machines for the actual workers. So as it happens right now, there's already more people working in clean energy industries, solar and wind, than are working in fossil fuel electric generation. So we have already created many, many more jobs than are being created in oil and gas and coal. Coal, in fact, well, when I was born many, many years ago, there was a 500,000 coal miners, underground coal miners in the country. Now most of it's moved into strip mining, like in the Powder River Basin, and underground it's all mechanized. You have these huge machines that go on and gnaw away at the face of the coal, and the workforce has gone from 500,000 to 50,000. It used to be 10 times as many workers. Now that's not Obama's war on coal. That is the war of the coal barons, the mine operators, to make more and more money at the cost of the mine workers themselves. So it's actually, we have a good story to tell there, because we are making more jobs, more good jobs, through clean energy than the fossil fuels are. The trick, though, is like these coal miners, they're going to be out of work, even if there's only 50,000 of them. It's not, they've been working in that mine, risking their life, their entire lifespan. And that's what they do, and we needed them to do that. We asked them, so to speak, and they stepped up and did it. They should not be kicked to the side. We need to provide work for them, whether it's in Appalachia or whether it's in the Powder River Basin, because they didn't put fossil fuels at the center of the society and the economy. It's not their fault. So we can't always make solar panels where the coal miners used to work. So we're going to have to figure that out. But this is a time where we plant our flag and say, when we make this transition, we have to do it in a just way that does not take it out of the hides of ordinary working people. Because too many times, like in the auto industry, there's robots making the cars now. There's far fewer workers in auto than there used to be. And we can't let that happen again. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to not only produce green jobs, so to speak, but we have to look at the fate of the workers who have been providing our energy all along.
Talking about the coal miners, and their numbers have gone down as technology has replaced them. Let's switch over to the bacon oil fields up in North Dakota. We've got some protests that are going on up there. They've been in the news lately. The indigenous peoples have been up there, also in Iowa. And it's my understanding that some of these coal miners and some other people who lost their jobs in the last recession flowed up there and are working in that industry now. So again, here we are shifting to another fossil fuel resource. Things are getting tighter and tighter as far as getting things out of the ground. Can you kind of speak to that whole issue
Sure.
about what's going on up there?
It's part of the whole collapse of the fossil fuel industries. Coal, all the big companies are filing bankruptcy. They're in terrible financial shape. The oil and gas industry is doing everything they can to produce more and more and discover more and more reserves. Now, if in fact we can't burn what they already have discovered and maintain the planet to be anything like we know now. In other words, they should not build one more pipeline, oil well, or gas well, because that will mean game over. There's no way around it. And this is not a political question. This is barely even math and high school physics and chemistry. There are physical reactions that are built into the way our universe works, the way our planet works, that say we, in fact, cannot burn past a certain amount of fossil fuels, or we'll have too much greenhouse gases and we'll just go off the cliff. So there are a couple of motivations for looking at the Bakken oil coming down. One is the people who have lived there for thousands of years. The Sioux people, for instance, the Standing Rock Sioux, are the key at that particular spot. The pipeline is coming through land that they do not technically own, but land that by treaty they have a right to protect because it holds their graveyards, their sacred sites, and so forth. And that was totally disregarded. In fact, a few weeks ago, the Sioux filed another action in court saying, please prevent the pipeline company from going through this area because there are sacred sites, there are graveyards there. And they filed it on a Friday. The company, of course, got to see that, and so over the weekend they went and destroyed those sites. Now, we'll see what happens as a result. History does not give us hope that justice will be served there.
And they were going to build the pipeline under the river, which is a source of clean water for the tribes and a lot of other people in that area. And they're worried about leaking and destroying their fresh water supplies as well.
And I'm told that I guess it was a year or two ago, there was a hearing about putting that pipeline under the Missouri River. It is the Missouri, which is not far from here. And they decided that it was too close to the city because if there was a leak, it would hurt the water supply. And in fact, what they did was move it downstream to cross the river downstream of the primarily European American city, but still threatening the water supply of the Standing Rock Sioux and other people. So that was a clearly racist act of saying, we need to protect the drinking water, but only white folks. Now that's just not right. So that's the kind of policy that they have been pursuing all along. And once you know this kind of history, it's not a surprise when you see the video of their security guards sicking the dogs on the water protectors that come out to try to symbolically, with their bodies, protect that pathway.
So what are we going to do to mitigate the atmospheric warming? We have all of these political issues. We have reticent politicians because they're being funded by big oil. How do we get past all of this, John?
Well, I think there's really only one basic answer, and that is the power of the people. If the people step up and decide that we are not going to allow this, we can beat the most powerful power economically and politically in the country today. In fact, it's probably the most powerful segment of society in all of human history. But Americans have a way of doing that. Not just Americans, but in our history, when in the 1700s, the American colonists decided they wanted their freedom, people all over the world, as they knew it then, said, you're ragtag bunch of irate farmers and manufacturers, and you are going to defeat the most powerful empire ever to exist in human history? But they did it. There were many other impossible things. The overthrow of slavery in the South. It was supposed to be the natural order. It was supposed to be something that was God-given. It was supposed to be the way of the world. And through a lot of blood and sweat and tears, it was overthrown. And we still do not have slavery, although we still are fighting the remnants of that history today. So at every step through history, I mean, and personally, when my mother was born, women did not have the vote. They were not allowed to vote. And there was many, many decades of work going into making that happen. So when people stand up and decide that we need a better life, we need a change, we can make it happen. The trick is to know what to do and what the urgency is. So our opponents, the fossil fuel companies, have been very slick. Back in, and this makes me mad every time I think about it, back in the 60s and 70s, the oil companies, who have some of the best scientists in the world, if you think about it, where to find the oil and so forth, geology, chemistry, physics, everything, some of the best in the world. Back in the 60s and 70s, they did the basic work, told their executives, you know, if we keep burning these fossil fuels, it will put enough carbon dioxide in the air that it's going to cause problems. Essentially what we know today in broad outline. The details they did not know, but they knew the direction. So the fossil fuel companies had two choices. One, go public with this and say, let's change and move away from fossil fuels into something else. Or they could stonewall and say, for the sake of our profits, we're just going to sacrifice everybody. And they chose to sit on it and then deny it more and more forcefully, to the point now where they give most of their money to the Republicans. They used to give money to all the politicians, hoping they'd be friends with whoever got elected. But any more and more and more, they've been trending toward giving their money to the Republicans, and they're the ones who are calling the fossil fuels important, and that it's a fantasy that we can live without them, and that global warming is a hoax, and so forth. So it's pretty bought and paid for politics in reality.
So the oil companies could have sounded the alarm over 40 years ago and didn't, chose the economic road instead. Mm-hmm. what can we do to give that sense of urgency and sound the alarm? And I know that Al Gore did over a decade ago with his Inconvenient Truth film. That kind of motivated people to recycle their water bottles, to change their light bulbs to something more efficient. It was more of a personal thing, but it sounds to me like we really need more than that. We need to get a whole society on board and start moving towards change. How can we, through this grassroots effort that you're talking about, how can that coalesce to a big enough thing so that we can actually affect the change that we need?
Well, there's a number of different approaches. Essentially, though, we have to have the government on the side of the angels on this one. And that's why this election is so important. We have one party that's totally for the fossil fuel burning and another party that is not totally. You have one political party that is practically the party of the fossil fuel industries. The other one, not so much. And in fact, the Democratic Party platform talks about creating jobs at the same time as creating clean energy. They talk about not leaving people behind. They talk about not leaving communities behind, because we have had a lot of injustice in the past of who benefits from the energy structure. We talk about having the federal standard do not significantly make global warming worse as a test. And of course, the Keystone XL pipeline failed that test and was eliminated by President Obama. They talk about how to reduce methane leakage and emissions. So there's a lot of things we need to do here, and what the people can do is vote in a way that supports this platform. At the top of the ticket, we can pursue people at the lower rungs of the ticket, from city council, NRD in our case, and on up, to say what is your plan to do? What are your proposals for dealing with global warming? Because it is very, very important. So in this year, the most important thing people can do is get together with your friends and family and neighbors, organize and talk to the politicians and vote for the right ones, and make sure that when there's a real choice and when it's really important, you really have to vote for, in this case, the Democratic ticket, the Hillary Clinton for president. Because I was a Bernie Sanders delegate, but at the same time, I'm not going to tell anybody I was telling them lies about Hillary Clinton before. But what I am telling people is that if you value a future, then you must vote this way. Now, some people don't agree with that, but I think it's the bad situation we're in, from some people's point of view, that we absolutely have very little choice. And we have little choice in many ways because we've been boxed into a corner. It's almost the last minute. Because, as we said, it's been decades. We've been knowing, some of us have been knowing this was coming, but we've prevented from doing anything about it.
So at the top of the show, you said that you started a nonprofit called Energy Link, and you have a new Democratic Caucus that you're forming that's addressing these to the parties. Is that the main idea? Then are you taking these to our local candidates that are running for unicameral here in Nebraska? How are you getting your organization's information across to the candidates? Is there some kind of two-way there? What's going on?
We're having conversations with some. As I say, we're very new. Okay. So we're not as far along as we wish, just as is usual in life. But we are bringing it forward, and we're starting to have those conversations. And the most important thing in politics is, after the vote, don't go home. Stay involved, stay in the street, stay in the room with the elected or people who will be elected next time, with those people. You got to stay there.
So do you have a website or contact information for people who do want to help you out?
Sure. We're on Facebook, the Nebraska Climate Caucus, for instance, and Energy Link. And, if there are people who want to get involved, call me directly, John Atkeison at 402-915-3210, and we will be very happy to put you to work.
Okay, great. Well, we could talk about this for much longer. We're running a little bit out of time. Is there anything else that you want to say to our viewers before we wrap it up for the day?
Well, it's a very dire situation. The other side of it is, though, that it is not too late. That's important to remember, because we're almost at the last minute, but it is not too late. Again, it's the laws of physics and chemistry as best we understand them. That's the laws of Mother Nature. And as best we understand them, yes, we're in big trouble. But no, it's not too late. So if it's not too late, but we're behind the ball here, we really need to commit ourselves to not doing the same old things we always do, but to get involved, bone up, learn as much as you can about it, and really get active, because it is up to us. Because if it's up to the powers that be in the fossil fuel industry, which are hugely influential to say the least, if it's up to them, we'll just go right off the edge of the cliff. If it's up to us, we'd like to leave a planet recognizable as the one we grew up on, for our children and our grandchildren and future generations.
Okay, it's a good positive message to end
There you
on.
go.
Appreciate it. Thank you to our viewers for tuning in to another edition of the Watchful Citizen presented by the Lancaster County Democratic Party. Our show airs Tuesdays at 10 p.m., Wednesday at 6 p.m., and Saturdays at noon on Time Warner Cable Channel 13. For more information about our program, if you would like to be a guest, contact the Lancaster County Democratic Party. Our contact information will appear on the screen at the close of the program. And I'd like to thank John Atkeison again for being our guest today. It was very informative. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So see you next week for another edition of The Watchful Citizen.